Hey everyone, we're thrilled to have reached our 1 year anniversary. We're so grateful for your support and hope our podcast has been helpful in both your personal and professional journey. We also have some exciting news. We've added new continuing education webinars to our website. So as you renew your license, head over and check out the available courses. We'll be adding even more in the future, so stay tuned. And now, without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. Exploring trauma is challenging. Not only can it be painful for those who have experienced traumatic events, at times we might not even recognize that one, it was even considered a traumatic event, and two, the impact of that traumatic event can shape the way we interact with the world around us. Furthermore, as traumatic memories about the past are brought to light, how might family of origin dynamics, such as the parent-child interaction, impact how we process traumatic experiences? And if exploring our past traumas can be painful, what might be some of the benefits of doing so? Welcome to People of Color in Psychology, the show that explores mental health topics specific to culture, diversity, and communities of color. I am your host, Jack Sun. Our guest today is Dr. Gloria He, a licensed psychologist in Seattle, Washington. Dr. He specializes in working with racial trauma, family of origin issues, and relationship issues, particularly amongst BIPOC populations. Dr. He uses a multicultural, psychodynamic, psychoanalytic, and anti-oppressive and social justice lens, whereby focusing on the impact of cultural and socio-political contexts. Having worked in group practice settings and college counseling centers, Dr. He is now in private practice. Her experiences in suicide research under Dr. Aaron Beck led her to carve her own path in examining cultural factors in Asian American mental health, and even speaking at the White House about her mental health journey. As a Korean American psychologist, Dr. He will be discussing why we would want to explore our past, dig up painful memories like parent-child conflicts, and how that can actually benefit our current life. Dr. He, thank you so much for being on our show today.
Thanks for having me.
Wow, you were at the White House.
Yes.
What was that like? Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
This is kind of part of my journey. When I was in my doctoral program, I had this realization that I wanted to share my story, mental health story. And there was the first ever AAPI suicide prevention conference. And my advisor at the time knew my story. We're kind of discussing more about how my mental health journey is impacting my current work. And he suggested that I go to the White House to give a personal testimony live with all these well-known commissioners, the AAPA president, so much at the White House. And it was probably one of the most impactful moments for me to publicly declare, yes, I am a person who has also suffered, and I am on my healing journey. And it felt very connecting. Even afterwards, a lot of people came up to me, heard about it, even tweeted about, oh, wow, I can relate to that. And a lot of people who didn't really share their story were sharing with me afterwards. And it felt really connecting to the AAPI community. Yeah.
Wow. Wow, it must have been frightening and at the same token, just exhilarating and very brave to be able to, speak publicly about your struggle and your story. And so with that, can you walk us through your personal journey and share with us any memorable events and circumstances that influenced how you got into this work?
Yeah. So I started out with a master's in therapy of psychological services, or some general masters, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I signed up for a work study job, which then led for me to be a research assistant for Aaron Beck. And he at the time was really interested in suicide research as well as schizophrenia research, and both I dabbled in. But one of the things that I did as a research assistant was we had access to 6 different hospitals in the Philly area, and we scrolled through the data of the ER of people who looked like they attempted suicide. It was really odd. So we scrolled through all of this, and we went to the hospitals and we asked these individuals who, whether they attempted suicide, and we had this whole research protocol to basically connect these individuals to therapy, free therapy, mind you. So free cognitive therapy in the community to connect them after they are discharged from these hospitals. Clearly there was like a lot of money and a lot of grant money. So it was something that was kind of exciting, I thought. Literally in the entire time that I did that research, and I've scrolled through many, I've gone to the hospitals, not one AAPI individual even wanted to talk to me.
Oh
And
gosh.
I'm talking hundreds of, there were several hundreds of people that we were kind of scrolling through and interviewing a lot of people. And there were definitely AAPI folks that were in there. And I was so curious about their story. No access, no answer to phone calls, never allowed me to even come into their room. And this is such a stark contrast with all the other individuals, like a lot of white individuals, a lot of like Black individuals. And, this is a whole complicated story because a lot of the BIPOC individuals were like, I'll talk to you in the interview, but I'm not getting that service out in the community. So there's just so many contextual
Oh, that's
factors.
interesting. They're willing to
So
talk to you
fascinating.
about their experience, but they're
Yes,
not willing to get
yes,
service in the community.
because my ability, because I come from a background where I'm traumatized by white supremacy, and I know how scary it is to talk to a person with authority but who is white, right? And so when we're kind of sharing some of the injustices and a lot of their struggles, they feel more comfortable talking to me about it because I can in some ways empathize, and it doesn't feel like I'm trying to get something from them. I'm literally just wanting to hear their story. And that didn't translate or transfer to even quote unquote a free service that is intended to help them. So there's just so many factors that made me realize, oh, this thing that I'm trying to offer or market or advertise, yes, I'm getting paid to do the research, but this is definitely something that I'm more curious about. Why aren't people going? And particularly people who look like me. And that became the journey of like, I'm not doing clinical psych anymore because that was kind of what I thought I was going to do. And I was like, I'm doing counseling psych because counseling psych looks at these factors, and I will only attend a program that will help me or allow me to go down this rabbit hole of understanding this more.
Yeah. In many ways, it was just so concerning when you're looking through the charts, you're seeing AAPI individuals who have attempted suicide, and yet they're not seeking the services that we know can be very beneficial. And as an AAPI myself, which is, the idea that we've been infused, talk about mental health issues because there's a loss of respect or face or honor for the family if we talk about these things. And so you saw that that's an issue because these clearly were individuals in the ER needing help, and yet they wouldn't seek services or speak with you. I mean, that this is, and of course you became curious about this gap, this missing population, then pursued your doctorate. Did you pursue a career in academia?
So I wanted to, because when I decided to go into counseling psych, I was struggling with a lot of my own family stuff in the sense that have some I wanted to have some prestige because my parents really wanted me. My dad's was a pharmacist. He retired, and my mom's a nurse. So very medical heavy family, and they really wanted me to be a doctor. And they're like, okay, no, if you're not gonna do a doctor, okay, just do pharmacy. And I was like, I'm good at all these things, but I just don't find it interesting. I'm more interested in, the creativity of exploring emotions. Anyway, so I was like, okay, fine, I'll do academia because that's more prestigious than just, being a practicing clinician. So I kind of went that route, and I love statistics. I mean, I can geek out, nerd out, and I love that aspect. And that's why the research aspect of my work with Aaron Beck was so fun. I found that, yeah, I could get lost in numbers, but what it just made me go further and further away from my desire, which is like, I want to connect to the people. And this leads to why the White House was so important, was because what I talked about at the White House, right? I was in my late 20s, early 30s. When I talked about the White House was something that happened when I was 17. I was sexually assaulted in my first semester of college, 17 years old, by a white frat guy, and I was lost. But guess what? I never talked about it ever to no one. I have a twin sister, I have friends, I have family. I talked to no one about it until grad school, and I'm sitting in a practicum starting out, and I'm sitting in front of a white cis man who is my practice therapy client, and I'm a mess. I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to say. I'm freaking out. So it's like, clearly I was traumatized and triggered. And that led me to go to, therapy myself. I'm like, what? I wonder why I don't know why I'm anxious and, with a white man. And so then I started to do my own healing journey of like, oh God, something that even someone who's in a doctoral program to help others do, I couldn't even have access to it after like 15 years. So that really make me more determined to do this work of like helping individuals who have these buried, suppressed, traumatic memories that they are so ashamed of, don't want to touch, and help them to kind of unearth them, but for a purpose, not to just hear a story of trauma because we have enough of that. But it's more that in unearthing that and really exploring that, there's a lot of healing that can be done. And so I was like, forget academia. I was like, I can do numbers on my own. If I really wanted to, I could do it. But I really it's more meaningful to me to impact people on a one-on-one, at least to start. And I could always go to research after. Like I have all the education to, if I wanted to dabble in research, I could. But this was a journey that I felt like if I didn't take right away, it could almost get lost. I might get lost in the fun of academia, even though we find out later, right, how disenchanted I was after all the injustice and everything that happened in my program. But I had to make that hard choice. Like I needed to go the private practice route just because of how meaningful it is for me to do that to my young self who never felt like she could
do something for herself.
Understood. Yeah.
Couldn't be understood.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I'm sorry that happened. It's appalling. And
Yeah.
then I think the other part that you're sharing here is you knew you went through something difficult, yet the brain didn't give you an opportunity to even make the connection of why am I feeling uncomfortable with this white gentleman in front of me.
Yeah.
And I think that is also very telling because as you're describing this, and please correct me if I am imposing a belief or an idea that's inaccurate, it's almost as though having had that experience, it made you reflect back when you were working with Aaron Beck on the suicide research and also saying, gosh, I can see why some of these people wouldn't want to talk to me because they may not feel comfortable or they may not have even made a connection.
Yes, exactly. And that is exactly it, where time is such an important aspect of this long-term therapy that I do, where you don't go right to past stuff, because just like all those individuals who attempted suicide but didn't want to talk, they weren't ready. There's way too much shame. There's way too much terror that we have to kind of create a safer, I don't want to say safe because it's always risky to kind of be vulnerable with an individual, but create a safer space, a more empowering space to like let the like dust settle a little so that they can then ponder on and reflect on the memories of the past. And that's often the time when the memories show up. So I have clients, we've talked for like over a year, 2 years, and then they name their childhood trauma. And like, we're talking big ones. And that's so rewarding for me because I was like, exactly. This is exactly why I wasn't yet ready to talk about what happened at 17. And thankfully, I found a way, my body found a way to get enough support, build enough of a understanding of myself, and, you know, to be able to then explore that trauma. But it's often like a timing thing where you can't rush it, especially with trauma. You have to allow your body to be ready for it, and then suddenly the memory appears. It's quite a fascinating process.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And because we're on this topic of your clinical work, how your experience has really informed how you do your clinical work, can you share with us what are some tips that we as therapists may consider in facilitating that timing that you've talked about so that we can draw out the client's exploration in terms of their past?
The thing about my work is that it's not like, oh, someone had trauma, so I have to plan how to help that person. It's that like everyone has hurts, everyone has memories that cause deep emotional pain. Everyone that I know has some shame that is lurking in the dark somewhere. And when you kind of understand that, if you empathize with that process of like, oh, there's something that I thought was always true about myself, and I don't want anyone to know about it, but now I know about it. If you understand that, then that could translate to your empathy to the other person. It's like, I get it. Like, let your body, when you're ready, it's like when you give the person permission to say, when you're ready, like, here are resources. So when you're ready, I know a really good therapist. Or when you're ready, like, this is where you can go if you want, because you don't ever want to take agency away. But I feel like that's kind of the work of like helping even the small traumas or the small emotional hurts are really meaningful to understand how to help someone else with like going to in that direction of empathizing with their pain or
Yeah,
even
it's
speaking to someone
yeah,
else.
it's like you're connecting with the human experience and thinking about hurt in a very broad and helpful context.
Yeah.
We all share the experience of hurt. We all experience in some degree this history that is painful, and we just don't like to talk about it
Yeah.
and really create the space and opportunity to explore that when clients are ready. And are there, or I guess just thinking about your clinical work, what strategies do you adopt, if at all? I know you use the psychodynamic framework, and there's a whole thing about BIPOC clinicians in psychodynamic spaces, and so I'm curious just what that experience is like for you, and bringing that type of work into your therapy room when working with BIPOC clients.
Yeah, I had to, that's a really good question. I had to tweak it to work for me. And I think that is for me my own empowering, decolonizing journey of this work. I was so anxious about, saying too much or laughing too hard with my clients because it's not the traditional psychoanalytic, psychodynamic way of doing therapy. And I'm like, that's ineffective. So when I start to have more freedom to just do what I intuitively know works for me, but still really bringing in some of these principles that are, I think, foundational, right? I do have a Western influence. I'm Korean American, right? There's a part of me that longs for attachment to a parent in a way that might look different than if I was, let's say, in Korea, like my parents. So when I understand, like, I can take the bits and pieces that I really like believe in and I enjoy, then I can kind of do what I want in the therapy space and do this dance with my client of working with them. So I have sometimes things that I do that my clients like, that hurt me and my feelings, or that upset me, and kind of we work through that. It's like, oh, maybe like me being blank faced or me being silent for too long triggers their trauma with authority figures. So we kind of talk through some of that, and I communicate, or I move closer to them. I don't do some of the traditional, interventions, because it just doesn't work all the time. So I think it was funny because I was always known, even in all the practica and internship, I was known as like the really loud. They're like, everyone's like, other interns are like, deep and crying and grief, and like there's a lot of laughter that's coming out of my sessions. And it's not that we're not doing deep work, but it's like, we have like a window of tolerance. Like, we can only tolerate a certain amount of grief and trauma, and then we need to connect on a like a light, like bring it back to the surface kind of feeling. And that is such a bonding and trust building experience with my clients that I never learned in all of my clinical training.
I couldn't agree more, because, when we're thinking about just, I guess, idea of innocence, purity, children, what do? They play, they laugh. Laughter connects us. And so when you're describing being, or just being yourself, having the freedom to be able to interact and engage with clients where there is that laughter, I think that's such a beautiful experience. And in fact, when you were sharing your story of, the concept of therapeutic neutrality and having this blank slate, I remember, I couldn't help, one memory of mine, and I'm sharing this, which is I remember in supervision, psychodynamic, affiliated in training environment, I actually told my supervisor, I really wish you would show some empathy for me. I just, what's with this blank slate
Funny.
stuff? It'd really be nice if you just show some emotions. Anyways, I just want to share, as you were sharing that. Yeah. So it's great that you were able to adapt and think, hey, how do I make this my own? So in thinking about in your career as a person of color, what were some challenges that you faced and overcame that you would be willing to share?
This one I know we could spend months on. But I will say, moving against the stereotypes of what an Asian American woman is supposed to be like is probably by far the most stressful experience of grad school. I'll give you an example. So I had a professor, quote unquote, well-known professor. He asked me, like, out of, 7 of us cohort members, he asked me, oh, were you born in this country? And I'm just like, okay, that was offensive. I'll note that. And then he goes on to describe me as histrionic. And I'm
Oh, wait,
I'm like,
hold on. I'm taken aback here. A professor described you as histrionic?
yes. He says something about histrionic. Okay. So already offended, but I'm in the middle of class. All my like Asian background of like don't interrupt the professor, but like you can talk about it later because it's going to bother you and you don't want that to happen again. So I took note of that after the session, after the class, and I went to his office because I was like very proud of myself. I was doing some work in therapy. I was like, I can't let this go. He needs to know. So I go to his office, and I kid you not, I tell him that that was a microaggression and hurt my feelings. His face turned red. He's like, I did not aggress. This is like a 7-year-old man just flipping out on me because I used the word microaggression and he didn't like that word. And I was like, I mean, I can, he's like, you have an accent. I'm like, what kind of accent do you hear? He explained to me. And so we just kind of, and I was like, hey, like, this isn't going anywhere. I had to say this. This isn't going anywhere. Of course, this is what BIPOC individuals always have to do with white fragility. But I was like, this isn't going anywhere. Let's not focus on the word aggress. Just, I did not appreciate that you said that. It singled me out. It did not make me feel like, it made me feel like you were misunderstanding me based on a stereotype. And he's like, okay, I understand. I hurt you. And that case kind of like subsided. And then I was like, and you used the word histrionic. Like, come on. I was like, come on. Like, we are using that word to diagnose in a pathological way. And you show up using this word for me. I don't think I'm histrionic. And I don't appreciate that you use that word. And he was like, no, you have like, it's not that you're like the pathological histrionic. It's like you're like, it was like almost saying like you're charismatic, because I am.
Well, then use charismatic, not histrionic.
This is exactly right. So I was just like, but like, I'm already like flooded because like this white man is screaming at me about the word micro. So I already knew it was not safe, but I knew I needed to tell him. So we were like agreed. It's like, I won't use that word anymore. I didn't mean it in a pathological way. And like, he apologized, right? Okay, I thought that was okay, right? Guess what? So I tell my lab group, my advisor, who is also a Korean American professor. So he and a bunch of other Asian American or Asian Canadian, a lot of individuals were in the lab. And I was telling the story about this professor, and I was like, oh, I have hope. Like, this person said, sorry, it's not going to happen. And now I feel really empowered because I told someone that they microaggressed. And then like a couple months later, or maybe it's like a year later, one of the lab mates tells me that in his class, he uses my exact story as a case example and twists it around and tells the class that I went ballistic, like I flipped out. So it's just like, I can't win. I can't do this, where there's such an injustice to it, right? Like, there's no point in trying to be with this guy. Like, there's no reason to. He has power, he has everything. What am I fighting for? So I was like, I'm not gonna go that route. But I noticed a lot of my suffering has been like me being assertive, or me like feeling like I deserve to be able to tell my professors when they do something, and they just can't handle it from an Asian American woman. There was another case, and I mean, these just go on and on, but like one that was really traumatic for me was, I was a research assistant, and a white woman, again in her 70s. So this person was my supervisor was a white woman in her 70s. She comes back from a vacation, and mind you, most of the time what I see her doing is Sudoku. She like moves her screen every time. So she's like really never doing any work. But she goes on vacation, she comes back, and she says to me, your work is subpar. I remember that word. Your work is subpar. And I'm like, she takes me into her office. And yeah, I talked about it with everyone. They also think so. And I'm just like, I'm a doctoral student. I've never been told that my work is subpar. Like, I'm detail oriented. Like, what is up, right? So I'm like, I'm confused. Like, what do you mean? And so she describes that the reason why my detail orientedness is subpar is because apparently I had a typo. I was like, a typo on what? I don't do typos. But anyway, because I'm too anxious, I would look over it. And she's like, you spelled this person's name wrong. And I was like, I looked at the presentation slides. I was like, no, I thought that they would want their preferred name, not their official name. So in the slide, I put the person's preferred name, not their boring official name. And she said that that was feedback, that I wasn't doing a good job. Okay, but this is the kicker. And then so I was like, okay, so help me understand. We got into this thing where I was like, all right, give me feedback, but I want feedback that feels just. And so I was unhappy with her, and I talked firmly like this. The next day, she calls me into her office, and her hands are wet because she just went to the bathroom, and she has my termination letter with her wet hands. And she says, "You attacked me."
Oh gosh.
So I'm in my doctoral program. I need this research assistant position to get my tuition waived in the middle of the semester. It was before spring break, I remember, because I was freaking out during spring break trying to find another RA position. She fired me because I attacked her, because I told her I don't agree with her, that I'm actually not subpar. My performance is not subpar, and you may consider looking at it differently.
Oh gosh.
Just
Yeah.
like,
So
like
as
you're
you're
not allowed
thinking
to say
about,
anything.
yeah, it does make it difficult when there is a power imbalance and when BIPOC folks confront, say, racism or microaggressions, which is racism. When there is a power imbalance, it is very difficult to consider, is this a battle I want to fight? And given these challenges, how did you overcome them?
I did it by really having safe places to vent and to kind of rewire the narrative, right? Because of course those things bring up shame. Like, was I attacking, or was I histrionic, or was I disrespectful for calling out a micro? Like I needed like a supportive sounding board to kind of rewire that shame narrative that's gonna show up, because my body is one of trauma, right? So I'm so used to taking on all the blame and then just suffering. But the really great thing about, because I was in the field, I had a therapist, I had other people who were just as like interested in, racial injustice. And a lot of my cohort members, like who are also BIPOC, like they were so supportive and talking me through, and also grounding. I remember the most humiliating aspect of that when I got fired was I had to tell my parents, right? Like that I might not
Oh,
go back to school because I don't have the money for it. I just got fired. And it was really interesting. My mom is a very interesting character, but in this moment, it was the most healing thing for me to hear. She was like, why do you even want this degree? Who cares? Like, you can quit at any time. She's like, just quit. Like, do something else. And it
wow.
was
She
like,
knew deep down inside what
she just
you
doesn't
wanted.
care.
Uh-huh.
She doesn't care about academic prestige. She like never cared. She actually cares more about me like getting married, and we could talk about that like a whole nother time. But like this academic, she's like, this is whatever. She's like, just come home, whatever. Like it's not worth it. If it's not worth it, she's like, who cares? It's not going to affect you at all. And that just gave me the freedom to like not like sink in shame and like the burden of like putting like a bad name on my family. So it's just like, okay, like, do I really still want this? And that's when I fought for like, yes, I still want it, because this just fuels my passion to want to help BIPOC folks. So
Yeah.
it got me to get a better position and finish.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
in many ways I'm glad you finished, got your degree. What, obviously with that comes the challenge of getting that degree. So now that you've completed your degree, you've actually done a lot of amazing work. So for you, what does it mean to be a Korean American psychologist?
Yeah, that was a really interesting question for me to sit with, because I could go a lot of different avenues, but I think what it means to me is to think twofold. One is to be the place where BIPOC folks and a lot of Korean Americans, I deal with a lot of Korean American folks, where they can work through their stuff through me. And what I mean by that is I know in this work as a Korean American psychologist, I know I will put on the face of many abusers, but also many healers, right? So I have to be equipped to deal with rage, right? And even if it's displaced onto me, I still have to accept that that's going to be part of this process, especially with trauma. And being able to kind of tolerate the complexities of emotions, holding that with my clients. So I feel like that's one. It gives me this honor, but also this like difficult journey where I often become the bad other, is like in psychoanalytic. I end up becoming something of their traumatic past. And that is so powerful to be, but it's also painful. It's also sad. So it means that I need to do the work to be internally prepared for that difficult journey. And that requires that I always constantly renew myself. One of the ways that I know that I have to prioritize rest, I have to prioritize giving something to myself that none of the generations in my family were ever able to have, right? Like they toiled, they strived, they never relaxed. And I took it upon myself to really came to terms with this, that even if I'm a disappointment to my family, because I could be doing more, I could be more successful, the way that I will break the curse of this intergenerational trauma is that I become a vessel of relaxation, of rest, of peace, of play, of fun, silliness. And, and that to me, I feel like I have to keep grounding myself in that in order to do this work. And one of the ways that I did that was I had to, and I feel like I constantly have to do this, I have to forgive myself. I have to forgive myself for all the internalized depression that I have taken on, the ways that I have abandoned my young self to, like prefer this over that. Like I'm writing right now about like just the nuances of like internalized depression. Like you have to choose Caesar salad over blanched vegetables. I was like, I love blanched vegetables. That's what I grew up with. Like that's what we eat. Why do we want cold vegetables? It's just not a thing. But I grew up like you have to choose the garden salad or the Caesar salad, and like the double eyelids and monolids. Like I used to have monolids. Long story how I magically got double eyelids. It wasn't because of surgery, but like I had to come to love my monolids at the time. And it was like, well, screw that. Like, why do I want something that was going to try to make me look white? Like, why do I have to alter my face to be considered beautiful? So it's just this like forgiving of myself for at times having adopted these oppressive beliefs that really, made me act in certain ways that I'm not proud of. And that constant like reminder of those past ways that I cringe at, like I have to forgive and understand the context and come back to a place of peace. And I think that's a constant journey.
Yeah, I like that. There's this constant shedding away of rejected identities and considering it within the context. There's also a space of acceptance that it's okay for me to feel these things. However, for me to continue to move forward and also break this intergenerational schema of you must work and toil till you're, exhausted. Well, at what point do we actually thrive as a community? So, Dr. He, do you have any other final thoughts?
I guess I'm excited right now of the new trend that more AAPI individuals are seeking therapy. And I guess my final thought is if anyone hears this, I want them to be encouraged to look for someone who they feel most comfortable with to share their stories with, not just to fix anxiety or fix depression, because those things tend to be rooted in a lot of other things that they're not going to know if they just scratch the surface with a person who's just like, oh, let's just do some symptom reduction. When you really unpack some of the stories, you'll find the deeper roots of your depression and anxiety and really find more, I think, more meaningful healing. So I don't know. I want people to be more curious about themselves and protect their stories and only show those stories to someone who can honor them. Yeah, I don't know if that sounds too abstract, but I have I do a lot of work in talking with clients who have never attended therapy. A lot of my clients and a lot of consultations are with AAPI individuals or just, individuals in the community who have never done therapy. So it's kind of really exciting and fun to kind of understand their distorted perception of what they should do with therapy, and really getting them more connected to someone who can help them out a lot more if they were with someone who could help them understand themselves.
Yeah.
Because this
Also, someone who may
parent,
have
yeah,
potentially shared experience or potentially shared context or cultural lens.
right. I think I didn't say this, and I know you already said it in the intro. So the reason why parent-child conflicts is important to dig into is they often are connected to our insecurities of our current. And a lot of times parent-child conflicts are not talked about when you're young. A lot of messages are implied. And oftentimes I find that those are rooted in current insecurities that drive them to do things that they don't want to do, or makes them feel like dissatisfied with life. And so it's really fun and important to explore the family dynamics and the implied messages that come out of it that maybe the parents did not say, but they gleaned from the interaction or the experience, that like, I'm a screw up, or I'm too much, or I'm ungrateful or disrespectful. And it's so interesting how to see that shame kind of worsens or gets bigger, and then how it shows up in the current. And the more you show insight, or more that you have them have insight about how impactful those micro moments are, it's so fascinating, because a lot of the anxiety and the distress lessens. It's the most, I think that's what I find really exciting about psychodynamic psychoanalytic work, is that you don't have to tell them to do anything to change. It's like the awareness, the insight of how where their pain started and how that grew makes them feel relief psychically.
Yeah, they're relieving this hole, this grip that they've been trying to contain. Yeah.
And they
So
think it's straightforward, but it's not.
yeah. Well, Dr. He, I want to say thank you so much. And I know that you're a hero for a lot of AAPI folks. Not just, I mean, just modeling, for example, to stand up to racism and making these difficult choices that you have done and still continue to. So I really appreciate you being on the show today.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, and you're really kind, and what you're doing is really exciting, and I feel inspired to continue. I feel more connected to the community talking with you, which is a joy.
Great. Well, that's what we want to do, is try to build a sense of community and this idea of creating a platform for people of color in psychology. So with that, Dr. He, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
A huge thank you to our listeners. If you like what you've heard, please share and subscribe to our podcast, People of Color in Psychology. Other ways to support us include registering for continuing education courses or making a one-time donation on the Multicultural Counseling Institute's website. We value your input and appreciate your continued support. You can send us an email, a message on LinkedIn, or send a voice message on our website. Until next time, I am your host, Jack Sun.